Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Outsmart Overeating Podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Hooper, and today I have a very special guest. I've been nagging my daughter, Sydney, to come onto the podcast, and I want to ask her some questions. Sydney, I've been sharing a few videos of you on my social media, a few reels lately, and it's kicked up quite the stir, getting a lot of pushback on what it means to be a naturally thin person. And what's been shocking to me is how out of touch with reality most of our society appears to be as it relates to what a healthy relationship with food is, what it looks like to be a non-dieter. And people have been confusing it for somebody with an eating disorder, which is very strange, but equally interesting. So I want to poke you a little bit. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Just a little bit of context for our listeners. You are 23 years old and live in the Salt Lake City area, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's me.
All right. One of my first questions for you is, if you had to identify what percentage of your day you think about food, how much do you think about food? Like 10%, 20, 30, 70, 80, 1%?
I can say I think about it when I'm hungry, so probably 10 to 15, or yeah, I would leave it there.
Okay. Yeah. So it sounds to me like you get hungry and then you start thinking about food. You don't think about food much in advance unless you're going grocery shopping or something.
The only time I think of food in advance is when I'm going to work and it's slow and I know I'm gonna have time to stand around and eat. So that I start thinking about what I'm gonna eat at work when I'm bored.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're not eating lunch and thinking about what you're going to eat at dinner or at breakfast the next day.
No.
Okay, so maybe another question is, do you think about food more when you know you're going to a restaurant that you're excited to try
Yes.
out? Okay.
I think I'm also more just I want to see it when it get there, but I usually get really excited for better food, like food that I love. I'll start thinking about that a lot.
So when you come home to visit for the holidays or Jazz Fest or whatever, I know I ask you what foods or what restaurants do you want to check out when you're in town visiting. And so that's likely when you think about
Yeah,
food
that's
more.
what everybody asks. Well, when people ask about New Orleans, the first thing I mention is the food, like every time. And when, yeah, I guess I think of like on vacations, I get really excited for food or knowing that we're gonna go on different places, and I like trying Mexican food and all that stuff. So I get excited about it.
Okay, so my next question then is, how do you decide what you want to eat? Let's say whether it's at home or when you are at a restaurant.
Usually what's most convenient for me or easiest. That's what my decision making usually. What's going to be the fastest, easiest option?
Okay, so it sounds like you consider it through the lens of convenience is at the top of your list, and then where does flavor fall into that?
That's also important for me. I'm sorry, but since moving to Utah, the food has got a lot more bland, and
For sure.
I'm
Yeah.
learning I can't compromise on the flavor either. But that means for me, if I make a cup of noodles, I'm gonna put a bunch of hot sauce or seasoning in it. Or I've been shown lemon or lime in the cup of noodles now. That's good.
So your cup of noodles is being upgraded here
It's
with lime.
evolving. Yeah.
You sound like a very typical early 20s
Yeah.
kid. So you mentioned briefly that you work at a restaurant. I'm curious how that plays into your eating as well. Do you snack when you're at work, or do you sit down and have a meal at the end of your shift, or what does that look like for you?
I didn't realize, I feel like my job is making me a snacker, honestly. The amount of oranges, yesterday a girl was like, "You eat all of our oranges." But they usually get thrown away, so I feel like it's okay. But at the end of the night, I always take food home. I think I'm starting to get burnt out on it, but it's like a easy and convenient, and it's a full meal that somebody else made for me. But I also wonder just about how it's made, how good it is for me.
So you are actually starting to consider the health benefits of the foods that you're picking. Is that also how you make decisions on what you eat, or does flavor still top the list for you?
This is random, but I'm actually starting to have a more sensitive stomach than I used to.
Do you feel like you pick certain foods based off of how your stomach might respond?
I actually have wondered that too. And I my boyfriend actually made fun of me because I started eating salads one day, like randomly. I started asking for salads, but it felt easier and lighter on my stomach and I feel better. So I think that is starting to be a bigger factor for me in my decisions. But
Yeah, who wants to be in pain after they eat?
the salads compromise the flavor. It's always a trade-off.
There's some pretty bomb ass salads out there too. Look, when I was eating salads, I was trying to always make them the lowest calorie, which also means the least amount of flavor. There wasn't necessarily nuts or avocado or cheese or full fat dressing in it. It was always just volume eating. How can I consume the most amount of food with the least amount of calories? And while I did want it to taste good, I was willing to sacrifice flavor for fewer calories. And that led to a lot of snacking and overeating. Next question then, how do you decide when you stop eating? We just talked about what you like to eat or how you decide what you're going to eat, but how do you decide when you're going to stop?
It's just that feeling in my stomach, that full. And sometimes I do, if it's something that I really love, like it's like sushi, I will push past it a little bit, but I found that I usually regret it because I'm uncomfortable. So now when I want to push past and eat more, I have that little voice where I'm like, you're going to be uncomfortable. So I don't do it.
Got it. So do you make decisions based off of how much food is on your plate? Let's say that you brought home some takeout. Most American sized plates are anywhere from like 10 to 12 inches. Do you determine how much you're going to eat based off of how much food is on your plate? Or again, going back to your stomach?
That one's tough because I feel like you've actually helped me break the eat everything off the plate. Like,
I encourage you to clean your plate if you didn't want to, unlike my background. So my mom is a bit of a food pusher, and Sydney has experienced that side of her.
I feel guilty when I don't finish all the food, but even now, sometimes, yeah, my boyfriend, you don't have to eat everything. I'm not gonna feel bad if you don't finish it. But I've also taken the trick from you where I like smaller plates because I still like the feeling, I think, of finishing my plate. So I just use smaller plates so I have less food and then I still feel like I finished my plate.
That's interesting though, because I don't think that I ever knew that you felt guilty if you didn't clean your plate. Where do you think that comes from? Because I didn't teach you to clean your plate.
Because I don't want to waste food. Because
Okay,
grandma
is that something that has developed since you've moved out of the home and there's not as an abundance of food and you're buying your own food now, so you are more careful with budgeting and making sure that you are eating what you buy or what's being given to
Wow.
you?
I actually didn't even think of that. I think you're right, but it's actually from when I was working and they taught us about food waste, and I had to be thinking of how much food is being thrown away. And I think also just the food industry, you watch so much food get thrown away. And then, yeah, I don't know. I think that I just feel guilty about wasted food. I see
Okay, well,
so much.
you are not alone. I think a lot of people feel that way. And honestly, I wouldn't want to throw out a lot of food either. I don't have a problem throwing out a few extra bites at the end of my meal and whatnot. If there's enough for leftovers, then I'll just save it for the next day. So I get that, but it sounds like you actually developed that feeling, that belief through your job and not at home. So this
I
is a
think,
relatively new habit or thought that you've acquired in recent years.
yeah, there,
Okay.
yeah. And
All
that's what
right. Well,
eating out will do, I guess.
yeah. I'm curious, do you have any food rules at all for yourself? Do you have any ideas of I can't eat after 8 p.m. or I shouldn't have this food in this meal? You're looking at me confused.
I'm like, I would eat a sundae for breakfast if I needed to. Um,
Yeah.
but I was trying to think of anything if we were ringing a bell, but I don't really think I have any rules.
Okay, maybe here's a question for you. What do you think about people who order on a menu based off of calories instead of what they really want, whether that's pizza, pasta, burger, I don't know, shrimp and grits or whatever the case may be?
I feel like if you're gonna go out, then you should eat what you want to eat exactly. Because if you're going out is treating yourself, and then if you go out and restrict yourself again, you're not actually treating yourself. You're just doing the same thing.
I love that you said treating yourself because that's exactly the language that I try to get my clients to stop saying.
That's why because it's so easy to be like, oh, I should treat myself. I've done that with money more than food, but it's the same feeling, same idea.
Yeah. So when you hear that people calculate their calories throughout the day and they try to stick to the quote unquote calorie budget at every single meal and eat according to a specific list of 12, 15, 20 foods, and they try to eat those foods only while tracking their calories. It's like budgeting, right? What do you think about that?
It sounds exhausting. I can't imagine. I can barely remember my day. I can't imagine keeping track of your calories. That's dedication.
Yeah, that's one word for it.
It seems like it would be mentally taxing.
And I think, frankly, that's why most people can't stick to it long term. Do you have a good and bad food list, or do you try to avoid specific foods because you think that they're unhealthy or processed, have too much sugar, too many carbs, anything like that factor into your decision making?
Fast food. I'll still eat it, but if I eat it too many times, like in a row or something, it just doesn't make me feel good, like mentally or physically, and I just feel like I know it's bad for me.
Do you ever feel guilty after eating meals like that?
No, I
No.
feel like if I made that decision, then I'm sticking with it. I'm not gonna feel guilty after.
Okay, fair enough. I guess a question I have for you, because we don't get to see one another. I'm in New Orleans, you're in Salt Lake City, so we don't get to spend a whole lot of time together anymore. But what would you say an average day of eating looks like for you? And let's just say, hypothetically, a day where you're not working.
Okay.
I think today is your day off. What would a day like that look like?
I always wait really late to eat my breakfast. I think I'm like a lunchtime, dinner time, and then like midnight eating. But that's also my schedule, I think factors into that because I get off of work late. So I sleep in later and I eat my first meal around like 1. But breakfast is the one that's easy for me to skip. I don't have much of an appetite. I think everyone feels that way in the morning, or most people do. I'll usually eat around like 1 and then I get hungry again in 5 or 6, I would say. And then, so yeah, every 6 hours probably, just
Yeah.
starting at noon instead of 8
So
a.m.
you mentioned snacking and how your job has promoted you to become more of a grazer, which makes sense to me. You're in a restaurant environment, right? There's a lot of food around. I also, when I was your age, was working in the service industry, waiting tables and bartending, and there was obviously a lot of chips and salsa and tacos and all the things. And so it is easy to pick food throughout the evening shift. And I totally get that. And it's a pretty active job. You're on your feet for 5, 6 hour long shifts. If you work a double, it's closer to 12 hours. you're moving constantly, you're burning quite a few calories for sure. But do you feel like you only really graze or snack on the days that you work because the food is so readily available versus the days that you don't work?
Yes, that is definitely. I'll have on a day off, I'll have a day where I'm like, I want to go get snacks, and I'll get usually one bag of chips, one gummy candy, and one chocolate thing, and a drink. And that usually lasts me till I'm going back to work. I haven't done that in a month or so. I think stress also messes with my appetite, so I just haven't been snacking outside of work. But I think part of that is just like the going to the store, and they're not, yeah, I just don't have them around me. If
Yeah.
they're there, I'm eating them probably.
So it sounds like you occasionally have one of these kind of snack days where, and I love your list. You got the salty, the gummy sweet, and then the chocolatey. And you are very much my kid. Like that
That's
has been
exactly.
100% my selection too. But I'm curious, when you buy the snacks, do you end up eating everything in one sitting, or do you end up with things that you haven't finished?
I usually make it those last. It depends on the candy and how much I like it, though. Sometimes there'll be one thing in particular that I just crush, but I don't ever finish all those snacks in one day. I usually honestly just get my stomach starts hurting because I had too much sugar. So that stops it for me.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense to me. So you're saying that's the kind of thing that you do. Would you say what, maybe once a month or every other month or every other week? What do you think the frequency is?
For a while, it was every week. Right now, it's at more like once a month. But now that we're talking about it, it's sounding pretty great. I might have to.
Yeah, so maybe put that on your to-do list for later this week.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing you just touched on that I think was really interesting, and I want to highlight it here because you mentioned that when you're stressed, you lose your appetite. And that is a behavior that we see in non-dieters. One of two things, right? People either gravitate towards food and lean into the stress and emotionally eat to self-soothe. But what we've seen in non-dieters, quote unquote, naturally thin people, is they do not eat and they have a really hard time eating because the appetite has been suppressed. So are you suggesting that's been your experience?
Definitely. I can feel when I'm hungry, but it's going to be difficult to eat. It's going to be a forcing it down kind of process. I will say I do more of a reward system with food. You made me just think about if I really don't want to do something and I'm having a hard time with it, or if I do something really that feels hard to me, then I'll be like, I should go get some candy. Or yeah, I will reward myself for really, but that's only when I truly feel like I deserve it.
Got it. So you got to be really suffering in order to really reward yourself.
It's usually something that I've been putting off, and then I'm procrastinating and I finally do it. And you finally did it.
And just to be clear, what are you, like 5'4" and 105 pounds or whatever?
That's,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much.
Just
Pretty
so
much
our
it.
audience can visualize this. So here's a question. When are you most likely to overeat? Would you say it's holidays or when they're
Yeah.
at restaurants, or,
I
when
think
are you most likely to eat until you're physically uncomfortable?
I think something like an event. Well, if I'm having like a good time, especially if there's alcohol and like good food and everyone's just like talking and eating, I feel like I can, yeah, just keep eating. And I'm not thinking about how I'm eating either because everyone's just like talking. So it's like a Mardi Gras, that table. I could just sit there and eat forever.
So just for context, every year I throw a Mardi Gras party. There's anywhere between 50 and 70 people that show up and there's food sprawled out everywhere. So it's more of a buffet style. And what you're saying is if the food is out and it's a party atmosphere, relax, socializing, food is abundant, then you're more likely to pick and graze. And maybe that's the scenario where you're most likely to do it, especially when there's alcohol involved. And sounds like mindlessly eating, not really being intentional. So not plating your food always.
Yeah. I think I have a mental hurdle sometimes with eating. So taking out the mental aspect makes me eat more.
Okay, that's a fascinating thought. What's the hurdle?
I guess maybe that only applies when I'm stressed out, and I'm a little stressed out right now. But it's not super comfortable.
So you mean that you have to talk yourself into eating in certain scenarios?
If I think about it too hard, it gets harder to eat because then I'm like thinking about it too much. There's like this pressure there with eating now. So my solution to that is seriously, I actually got this from you. It's because you told people to not snack and watch TV because it's mindless. That's what I need though. I need the mindless. So I'll put on the TV and
Also keep in mind that my recommendations are not for people with your eating habits and
yeah.
psychology. You picked up on these things that I talk about over the years, but not every message is meant for you.
Yeah, that one definitely didn't apply to me, but it was still useful in the end. I just reversed it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because your challenge is not overeating, it's actually under eating because you find
Mhm.
eating to be somewhat of an inconvenience you've talked about. And I
I
want
wish I
to
was a
get
robot.
did you just say you wish you were a robot?
Yeah, I do see it as this really mundane task. I'm like, I just did that and I have to do it again, and I'm gonna have to do it again before I go to bed tonight. It's just
Yeah,
sometimes
you wish you it was just as simple as plug yourself in the wall like a charger.
I I think about those smoothies all the time where people just live off of smoothies. But I like eating too. It's a weird mix. I guess it just really depends on my mood and what's going on. Because sometimes I can't eat, but sometimes I get a lot of comfort out of eating. So,
Yeah, and the circumstances, it's definitely different to eat at home by yourself alone versus in your case, maybe with your boyfriend and his family, or even when you're home visiting and we're going to one of your favorite restaurants. Obviously, our environment influences the way that we feel and interact with food.
sometimes
So
I feel like I have to take advantage of good food.
that's a great insight. So you're saying that when there's food that you really love or enjoy, you double down on the portion and go all in because you don't know when you get to have it again. Or maybe even do you have that mindset of it's free, so I want to take advantage of it? Or
Yeah. I am
okay.
that person where I'm like, I don't know if I want to go to this event, but there's gonna be food, so I'll go.
So next question, how do you feel about hunger?
Good
Is it
question.
something you ever think about? Is it something that bothers you or you find to be uncomfortable?
I actually do think about hunger a lot, and when I wake up in the morning, there's usually a moment where I realize how hungry I am and I'm like my stomach hurts. I just try to stay full, even though I don't always do a good job.
Yeah, and I think just for our audience, a little bit of context that's helpful is in the past, you really did struggle to eat. And so you've worked on being a consistent eater because it hasn't always
Yes.
been your baseline or your natural inclination to eat 3 meals a day. In fact, I think you would be satisfied with having 1 meal a day. And you've had to work on being more
Yeah.
intentional about eating more meals throughout. So it's like a reverse practice where dieters are trying to learn how to eat less. You've had to train yourself to eat more even.
It's true. And now that you're saying that, I guess I do have little, not that it's a rule. I feel because I know how easy it is for me to just stop eating, I'll try to eat something. I like an apple or just something to, as you would say, something to take the edge off. Like
Yeah,
make your
exactly.
stomach hold me
Well, and
over. And the more that I eat, the easier it gets.
okay. So you do have a rule. Your rule is we need to try to get at least 2, 3 instances of eating in a day because otherwise you would be satisfied with the 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious in your mind, when you think about someone who has a healthy relationship with food, what does that look like to you?
I feel like my brain's just going to like classic movies where it's like eggs and bacon for breakfast, like just stereotype it, I think, and like a sandwich for lunch. But I always feel like dinner should be something more filling. But that's all that I
So
really,
when you think about healthy, does your brain go to specific foods or does it go to
I guess,
behaviors?
yeah, I don't put a lot of thought into. Sometimes I joke that I'm like a raccoon and I'll eat anything. I feel like I don't put the most thought into actually what's in the food. I feel like the things that I can think of that I do care are super obvious. Like it's something that looks wrong or suspicious, or I'm not gonna eat that. I don't know what's in that, but I rarely do that. I'll eat anything.
Okay, so let's dive into what the opposite of that is. What do you think an unhealthy relationship with food might look like?
I'm sorry, but everything you tell me about
Give me
it's
one
not
example.
everything.
Looks like we may have had an issue with Sydney's interview. Her computer randomly disconnected, and I've not been able to get her back on the episode. I only had two more questions for her. I wanted her to identify what an unhealthy relationship with food looks like in her mind, and also break down what her current exercise or movement routine is. I will do my best to circle back around and get her perspective on those two things. In the meantime, I hope you found today's interview with her helpful, insightful, just a glimpse into the psychology and habits of a naturally thin person, meaning somebody who's never dieted in their lives. However, full transparency, she has lived under my roof for 20 years and has definitely been exposed to some of my ideas of what I think healthy behaviors are for individuals who are trying to stop dieting and develop the eating habits and behaviors of a naturally thin person. So she's accumulated a little information along the way, but it doesn't seem like she operates from the same place that a struggling dieter does. In fact, a lot of what she revealed today is just the opposite. So I hope to have her back on in the future, but I'm curious, what did you learn today? What did you take away from Sydney's interview that you can begin applying in your own life? I'd love to hear about it. Be sure to shoot me an email or DM me on Instagram. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a great week and we will catch you on the next one. Bye, y'all.